Joining us now on the program, as he does each and every week, to talk about the latest in Michigan and U.S. politics, is Dave Dulio, professor of political science at Oakland University, where he also serves as their director of their Center for Civic Engagement. Dave, thanks for being with us today.
Hey, Tyler, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you as well. Any good stories this week in politics?
I was wondering this morning, boy, what are Tyler and I going to talk about this, on the show today? I can't think of where to start.
Yeah, let's start as we always do. Seem to start with Donald Trump, of course, this week arraigned just yesterday in Manhattan, New York, under the Manhattan DA's office on 34 charges, including felonies. And this is an historic. It was an historic day in the U.S., an historic time, and it's also really interesting too because, of course, Donald Trump is the presumptive candidate for the GOP nomination for president as he seeks a second term, and will theoretically be running against Joe Biden or another Democratic candidate in 2024. Let's just start with the arraignment yesterday and just the historic nature of that moment in U.S. history, because not only does it have implications for this former president, but it has major implications for this upcoming 2024 election, even just the primary ahead of us.
Yeah, I think the big picture, right, is that this is a historic day because we've never had a former president be indicted on criminal charges. I think we've had some that have come close. Yeah. I think Bill Clinton back in the late 90s was under investigation for his false statements in a deposition, but nothing went as far as it has here with Trump. And I think too that you make a really good point that these two big stories, Trump's legal troubles and the 2024 campaign, are going to proceed in a way that's on parallel tracks, but they're going to affect each other, right? And I think that we can talk about this and dig a little deeper if you like, but the political ramifications and dynamics for the Republican primary are very, very different than they would be should Trump come out of that primary and be the general election candidate. I think that the implications, the impact of this case, and maybe others for that matter, are very different in those two elections.
Yeah, and it was a really interesting thing that I had heard in discussions. I was flipping through all the different news outlets locally and nationally yesterday as this was going on. And I don't recall exactly which outlet it was, but there was a really interesting discussion about what this means for the Republican primary in 2024, where Donald Trump is leading the polls at this moment. He hasn't exactly taken a hit despite these criminal charges and despite the arraignment. But when you think about getting into debate season in August and beyond that, and you think about potentially Mike Pence, potentially Ron DeSantis already in the race, is Nikki Haley, the former U.S. ambassador and a member of Trump's team when he was the president for a while as well. How do they address that in the Republican primary? Because on the one hand, it's something you can go at. It's something you can go at certainly as a negative against this candidate and his fitness for office, but at the same time, you are trying to win that Republican nomination. You're going to need that Trump backing to be competitive at a national level.
Well, his opponents are in a really tough spot, right? Because what we've seen just in the last couple of weeks, right, is that after it became pretty certain that some action was going to happen out of the DA's office, Trump's standing in the polls increased, right? And he has gained in his lead and polling lead over Governor DeSantis, who is, we should note, is not an announced candidate, but I mean everybody knows he's running for president. So Trump is really consolidating the party, at least a larger portion of it. And I think the pickle that these other candidates are in is that if they go after Trump, right, on this, that only helps him, and I think will drive voters to Trump. But at the same time, you make your point is that they need to draw contrasts and they need to give voters a reason for voting for them over Trump. I just don't think that this is the issue, and I think you've seen this, right, in just the last couple of days, where you've got no fans of Trump coming out and questioning the charges that have been brought against him, challenging maybe that they are politically motivated. And we're not talking about the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world here. We're talking about Mitt Romney, who said something to the effect of, look, I don't think Trump is fit for office, but these charges are bogus. And even folks here in Michigan, right? Former Congressman Justin Amash, former Congressman Peter Meyer. Again, no fans of Trump have said that they don't think that there's anything that behind these charges other than political motivations, right? So even when you've got detractors of the former president coming out and saying that they don't think that there's anything here but politics, I think that's something to take note of.
It's the old strategy of Trump's. I can shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and my poll numbers aren't going to change. It seems to be that's the case here. You mentioned Mitt Romney. His statement yesterday quoted, I believe President Trump's character and conduct make him unfit for office. Even so, I believe the New York prosecutor, in this case it's Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, has stretched to reach felony criminal charges in order to fit a political agenda. You meant between the other presumptive Republican candidates and those such as Nikki Haley who have actually declared their candidacy for presidency, they can't touch this because if they do, they're going to lose their polling standing, which is already well behind Donald Trump at this time. But for Trump, it's a distraction as he goes through this process while also running for president once again. But ultimately, when it comes down to polling, when it comes down to votes, could this actually be a win for Donald Trump, actually having been charged with these crimes and had the spectacle of going into the Manhattan DA and going into the court yesterday, having that on national TV, on worldwide TV coverage in the news? Could that be a win for him politically?
Absolutely, right. And we've seen that. I'll give you two examples, right? Number one, we talked about his rise in the polls in the last week or so. Whether or not that remains is another question, right? But he has seen an uptick in his support. He's also raised a bunch of money for his campaign in the last week or so. $8 million, right? I mean that's a drop in the bucket. What he needs to run successfully for the White House, but that's an indicator, right? That people are flocking to him in some circles of the GOP, and it's really this is all playing right into his wheelhouse, right? He is the king of earned media in politics these days, and it's like that old PR saying, right? Any PR is good PR, right? Or any mention is a good mention, even when you're arrested, right? I mean, so in Trump's case, right? So it absolutely helps him in the primary, but that script is totally flipped when we're talking about the general, because I think that while this is something that will help him in his quest to secure the Republican nomination, it absolutely is a drag when it comes to the general, right? I think that there are, even if all Republicans in the country vote for him, that's not enough to get elected. He needs independents. He needs persuadable voters. And I think that they're just done with it, right? That this spectacle, this circus is going to weigh on them in ways that a lot of them just say, look, I don't want any more of this. Enough, right? Let's get on to something else. I don't want to have to hear about Trump and his legal troubles and this and that and just that circus for 4 more years. I think it's going to be a huge drag should he become the Republican nominee.
Donald Trump, for context, 34 charges brought against him by the Manhattan DA's office, by Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, 34 counts of falsifying business records under Article 175 of the New York State Penal Code.
On that, Tyler, right? Those 34 charges, felonies, right? It sounds really, really bad, yeah. Right? And it is, but. Folks from across the spectrum in the legal community have been scratching their head over some of this stuff, right? The New York Times, Washington Post. So it's not just Fox News, right? But there are people that are scratching their head over these charges, and can imagine what the what the Trump campaign will do if the charges are dismissed, or if he wins, if he starts to win some legal battles, and he's just going to be able to go and say, "See, I told you so. They were after me. They're out to get me," and that's just going to feed his campaign even more.
Yeah, it's all about fitting that narrative. That is the way that Trump goes about this information. It's not necessarily that he's throwing out scenarios that aren't entirely true. They may be partially true. They may be entire falsehoods to some extent. But if it works with his narrative, it's going to be a positive for him in the long run, depending on how things draw out.
But he can claim right now that it's a witch hunt with no evidence, right? I mean, but if the charges are dismissed or he wins the legal battle, then it's true, right? To some degree. So it'll work in his favor. I think they're playing right into his hands.
Yeah, and that was something that was I did recall here. I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but it was a constitutional law expert that Fox News did have on during their coverage yesterday, who said before these charges were released, are these 34 charges that they're expecting, these over 30 charges that have been leaked as being what's going to be ultimately brought against Trump? Is this all going back from the Stormy Daniels case and the other also facing Donald Trump similarly for the hush money, or are these on different business means as well? Because if it's all 34 charges from that same case, it's that same basis for all this information. If something falls through on one, it's likely to fall through on a number of other of those. And of course, as you just said, Dave, politically, that's going to benefit Trump. On the other side of the aisle, we have heard, really been mum's the word on this matter, from the President of the United States to our local officials here in Michigan too. The Democrats don't seem to want to touch this at all. What do you believe is the motivation behind that, where you would think conventionally, if a former president of the United States, if the number one political figure in your opposing party is facing criminal charges, you're going to attack that?
Well, I think that Democrats know that while this will help Trump in the primary, they're fine with that, and they would welcome the chance to run against an indicted former president in the general election. I think Democrats think they can beat Trump in the general, and so they would welcome the opportunity to run against him, and they're not going to do anything to damage the path that we're on.
We're joined by Dave Dulio, the director of the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University, where he also is a professor of political science, on today's edition of the Megacast. You can find more information on the Center for Civic Engagement and other Oakland University programs by visiting oakland.edu/CCE. Oakland.edu/CCE. Dave, before we let you go, anything else on this matter or other related things we haven't discussed, other angles we haven't discussed on the Trump indictment, how it might impact our politics, not just here in Michigan, but federally?
Yeah, I think that this is going to be just another example, another element of the tremendously polarized times in which we're living, right? This is going to, I mean, I've seen some hyperbolic comments from folks about how this is going to rip the country apart, and I think that that's overblown. But it's not good for our politics, right? I think that it's a tough day for the country to see a former president brought up on criminal charges, right? I think take Trump out of the equation, and I think that everybody would agree that it's a bad thing, right? If it wasn't Trump, it was somebody else, I think you'd see Democrats not necessarily disturbed, but disappointed that we're in this spot. Now, with some of the folks on the Democratic side, they've been clamoring for this day for years, right? And they finally got their wish. But in the end, be careful what you wish for, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, it's not necessarily what you get him on. It's whether or not that actually comes to fruition and you get a conviction in this case to ultimately put Trump behind bars and therefore put him in a really tough spot to get back into the White House as he aims to do. Dave, thank you as always for being with us today.
Yep, thanks for having me.